Picture a thin green ribbon of farmland slicing through a giant beige desert, and out of it comes a state powerful enough to build stone mountains that are still standing more than 4,500 years later. That outcome wasn't inevitable. The Nile could have stayed a chain of villages arguing over water and goats, but it didn't. And here is a detail that makes the whole story feel weirdly modern. On royal labor projects. Evidence points to workers receiving official rations like bread and beer. So where did this begin? Start with the Nile itself. Every year, the floodplain could turn dark with fresh silt and food, while everything a short walk away stayed bone dry. That contrast trains people to think in calendars, storage, and rules. Plant now, harvest later, don't waste grain, and please don't let your neighbor reroute your canal. Over time, river communities got denser, richer, and more competitive. And competition in a narrow hallway tends to end one way. Someone centralizes it. By the 3rd millennium BCE, Egypt is commonly described as unified under Menes, often identified with Narmer, and that unification becomes a clean starting line for ancient Egypt as one political story. Narmer is widely associated with early unification around 3100 BCE and the beginning of the First Dynasty. Think of it as Egypt's first merge into one system. You can standardize taxes, mobilize labor, and push royal messaging up and down the river like a state-sponsored group chat. And ideology helps the machine stick. The pharaoh is framed as a religious leader and intermediary between gods and people, while embodying the power of kingship. Then comes the Old Kingdom, often dated roughly 2686-2000. 181 BCE, when royal administration scales up and tomb building turns into a national mega project. Micro-skit break. So I pay taxes in grain? Scribe. Correct. And you're using it to build a triangle? An eternal triangle. Organized surplus plus centralized authority gets you most of the way to the pyramids without needing aliens. Just paperwork. By the 4th dynasty, the Giza complex rises, including the Great Pyramid built for Khufu and commonly dated to the 26th century. BCE completed around 2580-2560 BCE. It's not just big. It's a statement. The state can coordinate people, stone, and belief on a schedule. So why pour that much effort into a tomb? What exactly is Egypt buying with all this stone? Two things: eternity and obedience. In Egypt's worldview, the king isn't just a manager of canals, has the link that keeps the universe stable. What Egyptians called Ma'at, truth, balance, and right order. If the pharaoh maintains Ma'at, the Nile floods on time, crops grow, and enemies stay far away. If he fails, chaos leaks in. A pyramid, then, isn't just a tomb. It's a public guarantee that the king will keep doing his job after death, rising with the sun, traveling with the gods, and anchoring the system forever. And here's the trick. When you convince millions of people that cosmic order depends on one office, you can collect taxes, move labor, and enforce rules at a scale that village politics can't touch. The Old Kingdom becomes the first long experiment in Egyptian centralization. And for centuries, it works. Until it doesn't. Around the end of the Old Kingdom, central authority breaks down, and Egypt fragments what many timelines describe as the first intermediate period. Roughly 2180–2055 BCE. Local rulers compete, the one system becomes multiple competing systems, and the idea of Egypt waits for a reboot. That reboot is the Middle Kingdom, around 2055 BCE. Mentuhotep II is credited with reuniting Egypt, and for the next few centuries, roughly 2055 to 1650 BCE, Egypt rebuilds a stronger state with a more flexible playbook. This era often looks less like build the biggest pyramid and more like make the machine run. Then comes the next disruption: foreign rule. During the Second Intermediate Period, often placed around 1700–1550 BCE, Egypt splits again, and a group known as the Hyksos establishes power in the delta commonly associated with the 15th dynasty, around 1650–550 BCE. So the Theban rulers in the south adapt, fight back, and eventually drive the Hyksos out, setting up the new kingdom, Egypt's imperial age. The new kingdom is where Egypt stops acting like a walled garden and starts acting like an empire, often dated roughly 1550–1070 BCE. It begins after the Hyksos are pushed out, and it produces the headline pharaohs. Hatshepsut, who leans into trade and monument building, Thutmose III, remembered as a major military ruler, and then the Amarnashak Akhenatans attempt to elevate the Aten and reorder religion around it. For a moment, Egypt experiments with rewriting its own spiritual operating system. But the state has inertia. After Akhenaten, the court swings back toward older religious traditions under rulers including Tutankhamun, and the machine keeps going. Under the Ramesside era, especially Ramesses I, Egypt projects power and builds like it's trying to outlast time itself. Then the Late Bronze Age world wobbles, around 1200 BCE. A wider regional crisis hits the eastern Mediterranean, and Egyptian sources describe attacks by groups often called the Sea Peoples. Under Ramesses IA, Egypt fights major battles against these forces. One reason he's sometimes framed as the last of the warrior pharaohs. Egypt survives the shock, but the cost is high, and over the following centuries the new kingdom fades into periods of weaker central control and competing elites. And this is the pattern now. When the center weakens, Egypt becomes a prize. In 525 BCE, the Achaemenid Persians conquer Egypt under Cambyses II, turning it into a satrapy within a larger imperial system. Later, in 332 BCE, Alexander the Great takes Egypt, and the country enters a new chapter, Greek rule, the founding of Alexandria, traditionally 331 BCE, and then the Ptolemaic dynasty. Finally comes the dramatic endgame. Cleopatra WI is the last Ptolemaic ruler, entangled with Roman power struggles. After the defeat at Actium and the Roman invasion, Egypt becomes a Roman province in 30 BCE. The pharaoh system doesn't vanish overnight, but the steering wheel has moved. Egypt is now plugged into an empire headquartered somewhere else, but Egypt's location doesn't stop mattering. In 639–642 CE, Arab armies under Amr ibn al-Az conquer Egypt from Byzantine rule, beginning centuries of Islamic-era governance. Jump to the 1800s, the Suez Canal officially opens on November 17, 1869, turning Egypt into a world shipping shortcut. Then Britain invades and occupies Egypt in 1882, because controlling the canal means controlling trade. Modern Egypt is born with the Free Officers' Coup on July 23, 1952, ending the monarchy. And in 1970, Egypt completes the Aswan High Dam, putting the Nile's flood cycle under human control. That's the story. The river teaches order. Order builds monuments. And every empire tries to rewrite Egypt, but the Nile keeps running. In the 21st century, Egypt gets hit by shocks that feel like ancient Egypt, except faster. In 2011, mass protests force Mubarak to resign on February 11, and the state spends the next decade trying to stabilize the steering wheel. To prove it still controls global arteries, Egypt opens the new Suez Canal expansion in August 2015. Then, the world is reminded how fragile trade is when the Ever Given blocks the canal for 6 days in March 2021. Politically, Sisi secures another term after the December 2023 election, about 89.6%, and is sworn in again in April 2024. While Egypt leans on an expanded $8B IMF program and additional EU support packages, in January 2026, Egypt signs major renewable energy deals as it tries to rebuild growth. At the same time, revenue is pressured by regional instability that affects shipping routes, and the oldest theme returns to center stage: Nile control, especially after Ethiopia inaugurates GERD in September 2025.